In today's video, I'm going to give you part 3 of my Beginners Grow Tomatoes series, and I'm going to show you some planting out. I'm going to show you how my tomatoes are doing in their grow houses and what to do when you start to get those tiny little branches on your tomato plants. Hello everyone and welcome back to Growing Frugal. We're here on the 2nd of May and this video is a little bit later than I'd hoped, but I hope it's a good time for you to begin to think about planting out your tomatoes. And if you're here in the UK and you've been growing along with me, it's still a little dodgy to plant out because it can still be very, very cold at night. So if you're growing outdoors, I'd suggest you hang on a little bit if you can. And if you are planting out, to do that in a grow house or a greenhouse if you're lucky enough to have one. So let's show you what's been happening since we last met in part 2. And if you're just starting now, you can find the whole series in a playlist that I've made for you. And there's still time, just if you're in the UK, to sow some tomato seeds and have some beautiful tomatoes when we get into August and September. So let's do it. Okay, so let's start with the tomato grow houses here. Here's the sort of normal plastic tomato grow house, just has a roll down plastic cover there. And you can see here that I've already planted out these tomatoes because they're protected. So let's go in close and show you. So in the grow house this year, I've got myself some kind of more permanent grow bag type things where I can just fill them with my own compost. And so this is quite excited about this actually. This is a peat-free compost, a new one. It's especially for tomatoes, so we'll see how they get on this season. And what I'm using here is the tomato halos. So that's these, they're called various things, tomato rings, tomato halos, and these are really useful. They're not essential. So if I didn't have these, I would have planted them straight into this soil here, or a grow bag, or even a compost bag on its side, and kind of patted down and cut some holes in it. But for this, I've got a shallow amount of compost here, sat the tomato halos on top, and then I can put extra compost in the centre part of the tomato halos, and that gives the tomatoes lots of space to root. So if you, especially if you've got a thin, a kind of traditional grow bag, they're not that deep, so there's not enough soil in there really to give you the biggest crop. So using these gives the tomatoes a much steadier base. When you first plant them in halos, you water from the top just a little until their roots get down, and then you can water into these troughs here. And these troughs make it really easy to water. You can fill that right up. Gradually the water goes down, and that helps to prevent you getting water on the leaves. And that's kind of the root for disease really, is that when we get the leaves wet. So whenever you're watering tomatoes, try to water very carefully if you're doing it from the top, but ideally have a way to be watering it from underneath once they're settled in and their roots have gone down. So that's 3 tomatoes in this grow house. We've got a Chadwick cherry, a Jen's tangerine, and don't say I've lost yet another label, oh there it is, and another Chadwick cherry. And the Chadwick cherry worked really well last year, and because this little bit of the greenhouse is more in shade, I've put the smaller tomatoes in this one, and the one next to it we're just about to go to gets a little bit more sun. So here we have a slightly bigger grow house. It's a little bit taller, a little bit wider, and it actually has shelving that's removable, and this has worked out absolutely brilliantly for growing this year. So let me show you. So in the bottom, it's exactly the same setup as the other one I've just shown you. So we've got 3 more varieties of tomatoes growing in this bigger grow house. I've got on the left there, I've got an orange banana tomato, I've got a Spanish big globe, and I've got a Jen's tangerine. So that's those growing away, and I'll just keep those in the grow house. They're happy now, and as soon as I remove this shelf, I'll be putting in some bamboo canes just to give them that little bit of support as they grow up. And actually there's some comfrey coming up, sneaking up at the back there, which will make a good plant food if it carries on growing. And then what I've done is I've left one of the shelves in, so there's room for 4 shelves in this grow house, and earlier in the season I was using all of them. But for now that I have got my main tomatoes planted in the bottom, I've left just 1 shelf in there. So what this is allowing me to do is to give some protection to my outdoor tomato plants until the weather has got a bit better here and the temperatures are higher, hopefully very soon, and I can get these outdoors. So in hopefully a week or so, I'll be ready to plant these out, and then I'll remove this final shelf and get the bamboo poles in to support the tomatoes, and they will carry on growing up. But in the meantime, this has given me protection so that I can grow more outdoor tomatoes, even though it's still too cold for them to go out, and without completely filling the house with plants, which I have anyway. And then the extra bonus of doing this is if it's a very cold night, I can use the plastic grow house as sun protection, but I can also fleece my tomatoes really easily. So if you're living in a colder area, it's really useful to have some lightweight fleece or something else that's very lightweight to put over at night if it's going to be cold. So in this case, I've got the fleece wrapped around the bar at the top of the grow house, and at night, if I think it's going to be cold, I can just lift up this fleece, kind of throw it across the front like that, give the tomatoes a little bit extra layer of protection. I've got some more fleece if I need it for underneath, and then I can just close the whole thing up. So it makes fleecing really easy, which is ideal because it means that I can grow on these tomatoes and get them going much earlier than I would be able to do otherwise. So as a beginner, if you haven't got a greenhouse, you've got space for one of these grow houses, if you can get hold of one and you can afford one, try and get one with these shelves in, because it just gives you that little bit extra flexibility throughout the year, and then you can still grow tomatoes just as you can in the other ones. And let's show you these outdoor tomatoes so you can see they're looking really healthy. So these have been potted on since part 2. So once your tomatoes are getting to be kind of double the size of the pot that they're in, they really need what's called potting on. So to pot on, all you do is just make sure they're watered, the compost is a little bit damp before you do it, and then you just tap them out the pot and put them into a bigger pot with a little bit more compost at the bottom and round the sides. So nothing too difficult. And these are some outdoor varieties. This one is an Aurora, which I had really good luck with last year. And then I've got a new one, new to me anyway, which is a growhouses. And these are called bush tomatoes, and they're a little bit different to your normal tomatoes. They kind of sprawl around and they take up quite a lot of space, and they might need a bit of support, but you don't have to do what you need to do with cordon tomatoes. So speaking of which, so when you're growing cordon tomatoes, these are the kind of tomatoes that grow straight up with a single stalk and then the branches coming off that fruit. What you'll find, these little vigorous shoots will start to appear in between a main kind of branch and just where it's joining the stalk. So what you do there is that you do what's called pinching them out, and I can do them when they're as small as this. So here's one here, and I'm just going to get hold of it between with my fingernail here and just sort of pinch it out. And there it is, just a tiny shoot, and I've just pinched it off, comes off very easily at this side, and that allows the tomato to put all of its energy into the main stalk and produce all those lovely tomatoes for you. But just a minute, because there's a handy hint here. If you let these tiny shoots grow on a little bit longer than this, once they get to say 5 to 10 centimetres, you can actually snip them off with a very sharp knife or pair of scissors. Be very careful not to damage the main branches and stalk here, mind you. But if you just take a sharp pair of scissors or a knife, and once that shoot is a little bit longer, you can just snip it off, just as I pinched it off then. And what you can do is put it into a little tiny pot of compost, and if you're lucky, it will grow another tomato plant. Now, I've not done this myself, so I'm going to give this a go as part of this series, but I'll have to wait a few weeks until the side shoots start to get a little bit longer. So if you want to have a go, do that along with me, and let's see if the internet is right, because I gather it's a really reliable way of getting getting some cuttings. And especially if you've put your tomatoes out early, like I have for this video series, so they're a bit at risk from the kind of cold weather, that's a great opportunity to get to try and get some seedlings off the plant before it dies away. And you may well be able to start again quite quickly without having to worry about the seeds. So yeah, let's all give this a go and see what happens. And if you've done that before and you know it works and you've got any hints, please let us know in the comments below, because I'm going to be trying this soon, so all hints are welcome. So now let's show you how I'm going to do the planting out of one of the outdoor bush breeds of tomatoes. Okay, it's getting windy out here, so let's get these tomatoes planted. Okay, so what I've got here is a big terracotta pot. Last year I used these sort of felt cloth pots where the tomatoes grew well, but these outdoor tomatoes, especially this Aurora bush tomato, it goes really big and kind of sprawling, and it got so heavy with the fruit on it that the felt pots were kind of getting pushed downwards. So I've decided to try one of my terracotta pots this year. So when people say put a crock in the bottom, you could use a stone or anything really, but we're just putting that and covering the hole so that when we drop the soil in, it doesn't kind of block up that hole. I don't know that they're absolutely necessary, but if I've got one, I put one in. Why not? And then to plant out, I'm just going to fill this with, I'm using a peat-free tomato compost this year, whatever compost you've got. So I've half filled this pot with compost and got it to the kind of right height so that I'm planting this in just before the first branches there. So they're going to be pretty flush with the top. So I'm going to keep it at the same height. Here's a fancy method to do. I'm going to put the compost around the edges of my tomato pot. Just pushing that down so it's nice and firm. And now I'm going to just carefully press down around the tomato in its pot, and then very carefully lift out the tomato, leaving that big indentation, and then I'll just tap it out of the pot. You can see we've got a nice root system. That's totally fine. And now I can just drop it, boom, by magic, into that hole. Make sure give it a sort of tap to make sure there's no air bubbles down there. This is Aurora tomato, and we planted those on the 14th of February, and here we are on the 2nd of May. Lovely healthy plant, and there we are. And because it's really too early to be putting this out, although it's very happy in terms of its size, I'm going to give it a little bit of protection and give you a tip on how you can protect your tomatoes if you've got over enthusiastic and you've planted them out a little bit too early and the cold winds are coming in, or the frost maybe even at night. So I'm going to use one of these plant stakes to act as a support for some fleece. I use these things for so much in the garden. Really want to get some more. I bought them originally for flowers, but I use them as a kind of multi-purpose framework. I've got the plant support just sticking into the plant pot above the height of the tomatoes, and that's just going to help me put on the fleece without weighing down the plant, or if the wind gets up, especially if you're in a coastal or a very exposed garden. Good to put fleece on, but with a tomato, if it's windy, it might just snap it. So I want to give a bit of extra support so the fleece isn't weighing down on the plant itself, and that little plant ring does the job. So there it is. It means I can fleece up my tomatoes and keep the fleece off the delicate leaves and stalks in case it pours down and gets super windy and ends up snapping. And that's it.